Hi, Josh Mankiewicz.
Hello. And we're back.
Hi, everyone. And we are back to everyone who's just joining us now. Hello, Moe, who just wrote us all. We just had a call with some of our hosts. So Josh and I are meeting again for the second time right now in the past little bit. I think we can get this started. You ready, Josh?
I'm ready.
All right. Okay. Well, everyone who has joined us already, thank you so much for coming on to this call. I am JJ Ramberg. I'm the co-founder of Good Pods, and we're so thrilled to welcome you. This is our first of our Good Pods discussion series, and we feel very proud of the way we're kicking it off with Dateline NBC's Josh Mankiewicz here to talk about his brand new podcast, which I assume most of you have listened to already, Motive for Murder. I loved it, by the way. Thank you, Josh. Before we start that, though, I want to tell you guys, you know this, Josh, but I'm going to tell everyone else just a little bit about Good Pods and why we started it. So we started it because we are podcast listeners. I actually used to have a podcast myself, and we believe that the podcast discovery process is broken. And so there are all these amazing shows out there that just don't get listened because people cannot find them. And we thought to ourselves, why isn't there a social network for podcasts? Some place where you can follow your friends and follow influencers and follow your favorite podcasters to see what they're listening to by show and specific episode. And then also a place to engage with them, like we're doing with Josh here on Zoom and also on the app. And it didn't exist. So we went ahead and built it. So I hope you guys all have a chance to download Good Pods if you have an Apple phone. If you don't, my apologies. I thought the Android was going to be out already, but do not despair. It should be launched in 2 weeks. We have it in beta right now. And one more thing, a very quick thank you before we start. All of our co-hosts, you saw their pictures of their cover art right before I came on and Josh came on. A big thank you to them for all they've done for this event. We're also going to put a big shout out on Twitter and Instagram for them. So we encourage all of you guys to check out their shows. Now, the main event, Josh Mankiewicz. For those who do not know, he's a correspondent for Dateline NBC, which is where he's been since 1995, which is when I met him long ago. He's covered some of the biggest stories of our time, but what we're interested in today is his first foray into podcasting. He recently launched what became a top podcast called Motive for Murder, and he is here to talk about it. Josh Mankiewicz, hi.
Hi, everybody. Hi, JJ.
Hello, Josh. All right, well, I have a very big list of questions that people submitted before we got on the phone. You very kindly answered them on app, also, anyone who put them on Good Pods. But for anyone out there, if you have a question, you can stick it into chat or you can stick it into Q&A here. And I will go ahead and answer those as well. So anything you've got, go ahead and ask them during. One quick thing, Josh, I got a warning from someone before, which is that not everybody has gotten to episode 6 yet. Some people are still in the middle. So if you're going to say anything that gives anything away, give a heads up.
Yeah, no spoilers. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. All right. April, I see you've got a last minute question, so we'll get to yours shortly. Okay. The first question I got is from someone, you've covered so many cases on Dateline in the past many years. So why this one? You had one to choose for your first podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing I liked about this was there were a lot of moving parts. There were a ton of characters. And it didn't fit the typical Dateline template. Wasn't the husband, wasn't the wife, wasn't done for the insurance money. So, if you watch Dateline regularly, and many of you probably do, I wanted something that wasn't going to be immediately obvious in terms of what the motive was. And sort of the way that the case and then cases came together was a long, slow, incremental process that I thought led itself better to podcasting than it did to a Dateline episode, which it actually was last fall. Now, parenthetically, the next time I do a podcast, my plan is to do a story that hasn't already been told on Dateline. Because one of the things that was a problem with this was that Dateline viewers, who are, millions, they knew the story. And so while there was some stuff in it they probably hadn't heard before, and certainly there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we talked about that didn't make it into the TV program. I'd rather have my next one be a story that isn't familiar already to the TV audience.
Do you have anything that you know of yet?
I mean, I'm going to look
Any
first
ideas?
at cases. I live in Los Angeles. I'm going to look first at cases in the Southern California area, that stuff maybe that we pitched that we ended up not doing. I'd like it if the case had an ending. Very hard to do cold cases because audiences sort of like it when you get to the end, which is one reason we don't do a lot of them on Dateline. But I'm not opposed to any particular case in Southern California, because I want to be able to go there and I want to be able to talk to the people involved without having to get on a plane to do it. So, and we won't be shooting this at the same time we're shooting a Dateline episode, which we were doing with Motive for Murder. So I don't have a
Well,
case. I'm looking around.
yeah, that's another one of the questions, which is when you already know the end. So you did this for Dateline, and a lot of the cases you do, there is already an ending. How do you go into the interview with an open mind?
You mean with the accused?
With
Well,
everyone, right?
I mean, first of all, we don't always get an interview with the accused on Dateline. Some people don't talk to us. But you know, the rule of Dateline is we try and interview everybody involved in the story, and that frequently includes the person who either is the guilty party or accused of being the guilty party. And those people almost always have a defense that they want to roll out for us. Sometimes it's the one they used at trial. Sometimes when they talk to me, it's the only time anybody cross-examined them, because they didn't speak to police and they didn't speak at trial, and then they got convicted. And this is the only time anybody's challenging their story. So that's worth it just for that. And you got to remember, by the time they sit across from me or any Dateline correspondent, they've already thought a lot about what their defense is, and it's always, I'm not that guy. I'm not a murderer. This is a conspiracy. My wife's family and the cops have it in for me. I couldn't have done it. Okay, I'll listen to that. It doesn't mean that I will not challenge it. In fact, that's the fun part of this.
Do you feel a lot of sympathy or empathy for those who you interview, the accused?
Well, it depends on who they are and what the crime was. I mean, usually these people are murderers. I don't feel a lot of sympathy for them. These are, we don't do a lot of stories about serial killers. We tend to do stories primarily about people who made one horrible wrong judgment. That said, I don't generally feel a lot of empathy for those people, but I do. Those people are generally more recognizable to the audience than somebody who's been killing people for years and who's got a screw loose somewhere, or who just sees himself as being at war with mankind, or more likely womankind. But Dateline's not really a program about professional killers. It's a program about amateur killers. And most people in our audience, most of you, I hope, have never been and will never be the victims of violent crime. But everybody's been in a relationship that didn't end the way they wanted it to. That's more of what Dateline is about. I mean, when Dennis Murphy famously said, in terms of what we cover, it's not really as much the murder as it is the marriage.
What about interviewing the victims? I mean, how did you prepare yourself for that? Because you didn't start out by doing true crime.
No, I got dragged into doing true crime. I was a political reporter for most of my career. I covered the U.S. House when I first got out of college. I was on the road with presidential campaigns in 1980 and 1984. I was a political reporter for a TV station in New York, and then for another one here in Los Angeles. And then I went to Dateline in 1995, and we did all kinds of stories. I mean, JJ and I did a story about a couple of guys who invented a business suit that was made of Teflon and it wouldn't stain. So we did a story in which we tried to stain this guy's suit, and I wore it all day long when I was doing all kinds of stupid things like eating and getting it all over myself, and working on
proudest moment, Josh.
playing football.
Emmy award-winning story.
Yeah, it was a great moment in journalism, and how we didn't win a Peabody for that. That's a crime that people should be investigated. But that kind of stuff was fun. And then in 2005 or so, we started doing true crime, and I really wasn't terribly interested in it. But then I did a story, which was the disappearance and murder of Breonna Dennis in Reno, Nevada. And I'm still in touch with Breonna's mom, and I sort of realized then that reporting's reporting and writing is writing, and those stories are as important, frequently in many cases more immediate than some of the political stories that I've spent a lot of years covering. So I grew to kind of like the transition. I did.
What do you do to yourself? We have a lot of podcasters here who joined. So what do you do to prepare yourself to interview someone, family members of the victim?
Well, that's, everybody always asks me about the murderers, like how do you sit down across from the murderers? That's not hard because, as I said before, they're always on their best behavior when they're talking to me. The tough part of this is interviewing those families because they've gone through something that's never going to go away. And there is no criminal justice procedure and no interview and nothing that's going to make them whole again. I mean, locking that guy up or putting that woman on death row, okay, better that they're there than out committing more crimes. That doesn't really equalize the pain that's felt by those families. And so you've got to, be cognizant of the fact that you're talking to somebody about, really the worst thing that had ever happened to them, the worst days of their life and how it changed their life going forward in a way that won't ever be reversed. And that is a very big responsibility. And you have to strike some balance because, when they start crying, you can't start crying. You're a journalist. But on the other hand, you're also, you've also got to get a story out of them that reflects what they've gone through. And they also, people don't do an interview just to show you how miserable or how sad they are. They have things they want to say, things that in many cases they feel law enforcement wasn't listening to or wasn't listening to closely enough. And so that's sort of part of what we're doing at Dateline. That, and, in many cases, the story that we're telling of the person who died, that's going to end up being the most journalism that is ever associated with that person. A lot of people we cover are not famous. They're not getting full-page obituaries in the New York Times. The most talk and discussion of that person and how they lived won't be in their local paper or in their local news. It'll be on Dateline. That's a big responsibility.
After doing so many, how many stories do you think you've done so far for Dateline in true crime? Any idea? Lots.
100?
Lots and lots. So after doing that many stories and being so close up to so many horrible things, what do you think? And does that affect you? What do you think of humanity? What do you think of people? Are you scared to look out the door?
No, I'm not scared to go outside. Now I am because of COVID, but not because of crime. But, you do see some of the worst things that people can do to each other. And it is mind-boggling because frequently the person that they're doing it to is somebody that they once loved or somebody that might be the mother or father of their children. And you see all the collateral damage, all the sort of what I always talk about as being the ripple effect of murder. It's not just that family. It's the neighbor who didn't really know them that well, but will never let their kid out anymore, after dark. And that kid then grows up resenting their parents. And then they have a whole series of behaviors that result from that. And that's all, in one way or another, sort of traceable that back to that murder next door. There's a lot of people that get hurt in these things. Clearly the immediate family members, but also all sorts of other people who you sort of don't see and don't think about. I don't have people. I get asked a lot if I have nightmares about these cases. I don't, but you do stay in touch with the people involved because when you spend 2-3 days with somebody, which we do, or even sometimes you do an interview and it's just 2 or 3 hours of you talking with them about what happened. That tends to stay with you. But generally, the last interview I did sort of helps the next one I do. It helps to
I
understand
think
what people are going through.
I think that gets to the next question somebody just wrote in from the Shit Show podcast. How do you emotionally cope? How do you
Uh,
emotionally cope after a hard case?
well, they're all terribly sad. I mean, there is no one that's worse than another. I mean, one of the things that helps me personally is that it takes so long to do one of these stories. I mean, Dateline stories are not over. They don't air that night. This isn't like local news. I mean, we do an interview, and then the next day we'll do another interview, and then we might do interviews for a week, and I might come back and do another couple of days of interviews, and then we spend a couple of weeks putting the script together. The person who does JJ's job for that story and mine, I mean, the producer and I will work on that together. Ultimately, it's my writing that has to come out of my mouth, but the scripting process is definitely collegial. And then it takes a while to edit it, and then we show it to our bosses in New York, and then if it's not the right size, if it's too long or something, we have to leave some stuff out, compress some things, which, by the way, is one big advantage of podcasts. You don't have to do that. But the sheer amount of time that it takes to do one of these stories gives you a little emotional distance and some literal distance from that interview. But it is true that when I'm watching these stories in the production stage, and I'm going through the interview and figuring out which parts of the interview we're going to use, which clips, I inevitably remember not just what they said at that point in the transcript. We get all the interviews transcribed, but I remember how I felt when I heard that. And sometimes that helps me actually decide what we're going to use and what tells that part of the story most accurately.
You made it sound like it takes weeks, but this story took years, didn't it? Motive for Murder?
Well, the story of I'm saying it takes weeks or months to do the Dateline story. Frequently, right. Start to finish, it's in some cases the better part of 10 years between when the murder was committed and when it gets adjudicated. I mean, these murders happened in 2012 in Motive for Murder, and the trial wasn't until 2018. It took a very, very long time. And there was a long period of time in which it looked like nothing was happening, at least to some of the families involved. It looked like nothing was happening.
And at what point did you come in on this story?
We started covering it, I believe, Motive for Murder is about two different murders. I believe we started covering it right after the first murder. I think we were already on it by the time the second murder happened, which was 10 months later. And that was Ann Preisman, the producer of the broadcast, who you probably remember from Dateline. And
right.
And so she's been on it since 2012. I didn't come on it until 2018 was when the trial happened, and I started reading up on it. And then we didn't interview people until 2019. It took a long time to get everybody lined up, and there were some legal proceedings that dragged everything out. So we weren't actually shooting this until last summer, and then it aired on Dateline, I think in September, if I'm not wrong, but it aired in the fall. And we started recording the podcast, the audio in the field back at the concurrently when we were shooting the Dateline story. And then sort of after we'd done the TV episode, that's when we sort of started on the podcast. So most of the podcast work got done this year for these crimes that were committed back in 2012.
So how many stories do you think, I mean, you probably don't have an exact number, but does Dateline look into that never make air because people won't get interviewed, or most? Are you saying?
Yeah, there's no way to know, but I mean most pitches aren't accepted for one reason or another. People don't want to talk. The story sort of doesn't have the right kind of ending. We don't usually do stories in which involve sex crimes. We don't usually do stories which involve when kids are the victim. The story in Idaho that's playing out this week is actually one notable exception to that. What we've learned over the years is that when children are the victims in the story, the TV audience, they just change the channel. I just made a gesture which suggests that I grew up in the 1950s because this is how TV channels back then. So that should tell you.
Now you have this.
Not a whole lot of that anymore. But anyway, that's the danger of telling some kinds of stories, which is that they're simply so unpalatable to the audience. They don't even want to hear how it comes out. So, so there's lots of stories that we look into that for one reason or another, we end up not doing, either because people don't want to talk, or some party in the story that's essential doesn't want to talk, or some party that's essential in the story has already gone to the competition, or somebody else has already done the story, or people want money. I mean, I can think of a couple of big stories right off the top of my head in which we wanted to cover, and they wanted us to cover it, the people involved in the story, but they wanted to be paid. And that's kind of a non-starter. We can't do that.
Right, that goes against the news rules. You've been involved. The Dateline's been doing this. You're like, one of the OG true crime media outlets out there, and now it's really exploded. Right? If you just look at our host list, and that is just a tiny percentage of people out there doing true crime podcasts. So, what do you think as you're looking at this from your vantage point of doing this for so long?
As I've said before, I mean, I had to be dragged into this, and I certainly didn't see the true crime wave coming. But it's great to see. It's great to see so many people so interested in what's happening in the world. And you see a little bit of that with the engagement, the political engagement that's going on currently. That's all part of it. There is a discussion going on right now about the role of policing and the role of government. And those discussions are all absolutely healthy. That's what we should be having, is discussions about that kind of thing. And so and true crime is part of that. I mean, almost everybody who's involved in a true crime story, and that I've done, and that anybody who's brushed up against the criminal justice system in any way, has sort of a different way of looking at it and a different story to tell than people on dramatic TV shows in which, crimes get solved in an hour, and the cops are all, wonderful people who are like half police and half social workers, and the district attorneys do their job perfectly and respond to what the family needs when they need it. Television drama tends to present a kind of an idealized version of the criminal justice system. That's not always real life, and all the people in our stories know that in one way or another. So in that sense, I think it's very healthy. And, people who are fans of, I don't even know what the number one TV show is right now, but let's say it's NCIS. That certainly was the number one show for many years. Those people are fans of that show, and they know the names of the actors, they know the names of the episodes. They don't see themselves as being on a common mission with the people on that show, because those people are actors. But we're real people, and we actually are out there working on stories about these crimes. And so many of the people who are in your audience right now are hearing this, and so many of the people who are in the Dateline audience, they see themselves, the people I run into at CrimeCon every year, they see all of us as being sort of part of the same team. That's very gratifying.
Someone asked a question to you, which is, how do you feel true crime podcasters can walk the line between telling a story and giving their opinion and not really knowing what the answer is?
Well, I mean, look, we almost never give our own opinions on Dateline, certainly not about things like whether somebody's guilty or not. And I get asked that all the time, and I never say. I think your conscience needs to be your guide in that, which is, if you're talking about something and you think to yourself, am I expressing my own opinion here, or I'm really sort of going off the facts? My guess is your conscience is telling you something. There's probably a way to phrase that is more accurate to the facts, or more in keeping with what you know, as opposed to what you want to believe. I mean, some of the biggest mistakes in journalism over the years, the stories that everybody knows, the stories that people had to retract, the stories that cost careers, those are almost always stories in which journalists, did a story and said something that they believed to be true and thought probably was true, and thought that the facts sort of justified that, when in fact a more cold-blooded assessment of those facts might be that the facts really didn't add up to that. And those are the traps that journalists can sometimes fall into, is you end up trying to use the facts to prove your hypothesis, and those are inevitably the stories that get retracted and get people in trouble.
Right. And and it's interesting, right? Because there are a lot of people out there trying to do a lot of good, but haven't been trained as journalists.
Yeah, and
Maybe to ask
that's the
them.
question. I mean, our podcasters journalists? Some of you are, and some of you are not, and some of you are clearly comfortable being citizen journalists, and clearly some of you see yourselves as advocates. And all I ask is that you should make it clear to your audience, which you are.
Right. I have a couple of questions here. One is just a shout out from Kimberly and Katie from A Date with Dateline, who just wanted to tell you that they're on here and they say hi.
Well, first of all, if you're not listening to A Date with Dateline, you're missing a lot of fun, because Kimberly and Katie are the greatest, and they watch every episode of Dateline, and they dissect it on this podcast the way we do in the office. It's like listening to a discussion at the Dateline water cooler. They're talking about people's hair. They're talking about who's attractive, who's wearing what expression people had. It's quite a granular dissection of Dateline episodes. And Kimberly and Katie are the greatest.
Well, I know you guys have a lot of fans, because I remember, was it a year ago? Or maybe you do this every year, a cook-off, right? You have the Keith Morrison fans against the Josh Mankiewicz fans.
Yeah, they did that. We've done that a couple of years in which we invite people from the audience to a fan event, and twice now we've done it where we all split up and cook things. I don't really like that, because then you won't meet the people that are on your team, and I want to meet the people that are on Andrea's team. But I do like meeting all our fans, and we do that. I'm hoping that CrimeCon, which was supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago and got postponed because of the coronavirus, is going to actually happen in October in Orlando. That's the plan anyway. And if it does happen, then I'll be there.
Oh, once again, against Keith Morrison, perhaps. All right, I've got another question.
Okay, Keith does not know how to cook, just FYI. Right?
I hear you know how to make a good steak. That's all I know.
That's all I know how to do.
This is about a specific case, so I don't know if you want to comment on it now, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask it. Is what do you think about the recent developments in the Daybell case, about the remains that were found?
It's not my story. It's a Keith story. And we're on the ground right now covering that in a couple of different locations, because we've been doing that case really sort of since it broke. The sad thing, of course, is that inside law enforcement and inside certainly journalism, people who've been covering that case, the discovery of bodies yesterday was met with a lot of sadness sort of around the country. I think a lot of people were holding out hope that those kids are going to turn up alive somewhere. But as I said, inside law enforcement and inside the community of journalists that was covering that case, it was never going to end any other way except the way it did. I mean, it was widely assumed that those kids had already been killed, and the only question was, where were they? Were they ever going to be found, and what was going to happen once they were found? So I think you're sort of seeing the next step in this, and sort of cascading forward. There will be, there may be charges and trials, and who knows what else.
Right.
And also, who knows what else will come to light that we don't already know about. That's the thing. But I don't know a lot about the details of that story. I only know what I've been reading the last 24 hours.
I'm going to, April from All Cats Are Gray in the Dark has a question for you also. Is there an unsolved case, whether you've worked on it or not, that has sort of haunted you or stuck with you?
President Kennedy. That's the first murder I ever paid any attention to.
Sorry, which one was that? You cut out right when you said.
Oh, well, President Kennedy. President Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was 8 years old when he was killed, and I wasn't living in the United States then. My dad was in the Peace Corps, and we were living in South America. But I remember that like it happened this morning. Most people who are old enough to have lived through that remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard about that. Then years later, my dad went to work for Robert Kennedy as his press secretary. And in those years, numerous people came to Senator Kennedy with their own theories of what had really happened to his brother. Bobby Kennedy was not tremendously interested in hearing dozens of theories a year from people. So he designated someone on his staff to be the contact person with all these people who were approaching him with various conspiracy theories, some of them crazy and some of them not so crazy, about what might have happened to President Kennedy in Dallas. And my dad was the person on the staff that Kennedy asked to do that. So when I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, this river of people came through our house, many of them with these like giant blow-ups of the grassy knoll or other areas in Dallas, and all kinds of minutia about that assassination. So, I mean, that was sort of my first exposure to sort of, true crime journalism. I was hearing all of this when I was a kid. That story's always stuck with me, as it has with lots of Americans my age and older. It's sort of the first big conspiracy theory that got a lot of, it spawned, thousands of other conspiracy theories, many of them absolute lunacy about that crime and about others. But then years later, when I was covering Congress, the U.S. House did a special investigation, had a select committee that investigated the Kennedy assassination, and so there was a whole sort of redoing of that, and they took it very seriously, and they did an enormous amount of work on that. And I covered those hearings. I sat in there nearly every day. So that's always been the case that most interested me. And if you're going to ask me what I think about it, I'm going to tell you I still don't know. But I do not know. I do not believe that the official version, the one that was rolled out in the Warren Commission, is the full story. But who it was and who was really responsible, I think we still don't know.
Though someone just asked here, the shit show again, do you have a favorite conspiracy theory that you want to share with us?
You mean about that or about anything?
About that.
Oh, no. I mean, only that it's impossible to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't involved. It's also impossible to believe that he was the only person involved. And so many things about him and about his life and about his conduct just don't make a lot of sense. And, all these years later, I mean, that's a story that, as far as I'm concerned, there's still digging to do on. I mean, a lot of the people involved are no longer around, but there's still work that can be done. And by the way, if any of you are in Dallas and you have a chance to go to the sixth floor museum, it's great.
All right, changing tacks again to your own career. Crime Redefined asks, what are some of the worst mistakes you've seen in law enforcement investigations? And can you think of how they could have been prevented? Or have you seen any in your report?
Yeah, I was, let's see, when I was covering Long Island for the CBS station in New York, I was doing a story about a doctor who was accused of killing, I think, his son or his stepson. This was a long time ago, and police had gone to the doctor's house, and they had discovered a bullet hole in a wall that had been covered up by somebody hanging a picture over it. And they missed it maybe the first time, but then they went back and they saw this hole, and so they dug the slug out, and they were trying to match it to a gun that I think the doctor owned or was associated with him. And anyway, and they did, and they matched it, and they realized, okay, this is it. We've got our man here. But during this entire process, the finding of the bullet hole, the digging out of the slug, and the subsequent firearms analysis that went on, they'd forgotten to keep an eye on the doctor. And so when they went to arrest him, he was not home, and he was not at his office, and he was not in any hospital, and they couldn't find him. And then finally they did find his car, and it was at Kennedy Airport. He was no longer in the United States. He had run away. I don't know whether they ever got him. But, I mean, yeah, so there's certainly stories like that. I mean, look, homicide detectives, the people that we routinely cover on Dateline, they are some of the most dedicated law enforcement professionals. And one of the great things about Dateline is we're really only covering, most of the time, sort of the best of law enforcement, not all of law enforcement. So, the people we cover are, the men and women who sort of never give up on cases, even though it looks like there's nowhere to go. And they're the ones who take the file home with them on the weekends or on vacation or when they change jobs. And then they make sure that it gets passed off to somebody else when they retire. And that kind of dedication is what solves a lot of cases. But I mean, are there colossal mistakes? I mean, look at John Bonet. I mean, there's a case that began with all kinds of like law enforcement screw ups that ended up muddying the trail for all kinds of investigations that follow.
I mean, it is unbelievable just to get back to your point before, how people dedicate their entire lives to these cold cases. We had been talking about the book earlier, and just how many detectives really dedicated their career to trying to solve that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, I mean, there are. I mean, I see a lot of detectives. A very common thing is you go to their desk, and underneath the glass surface of their desk, they have all these photos, which are the photos of the dead people whose deaths they're trying to solve. That's always, they see them. That's the first face they see when they get to the office in the morning. It's the last face they see when they're, picking up the, their stuff and heading home for the night. A lot of people have, posters up in the office of the person whose death they're investigating. So that all bespeaks a tremendous level of commitment.
So I think we have time for one last question. It comes from Alex from Weird Distractions. And the question is, if you could have picked an alternative career path, what would it be? Would you have ended up in the true crime field? I already know the answer to the second one.
What's the answer, JJ?
I think, well, you've told us 3 times that you fell into true crime. So I'm going to guess that no other path would have gotten you to true crime.
I don't know. I mean, there was a long period of time in which I sort of wished that I'd gone to law school and then gotten into federal prosecution somewhere. I would not trade a career in journalism for anything. It's the only thing I wanted to do. And 45 years later, I'm still doing it. So I'm incredibly lucky. And I remind myself of that every time I'm, waiting at the commuter airline terminal for the flight to Shreveport. And it's, incredibly hot and I don't want to be there. And I'm missing dinner with my friends in Los Angeles. And I think to myself, get on the goddamn plane and shut up. This is what you always wanted to do. So, I'm pretty happy with this. I could have, I might have been a prosecutor at some point. I would not be a police officer. I would not, I'm not tough enough for that, I don't think.
Well, now you're also a podcaster.
Now I'm a podcaster. And let me just say this.
Here's
what I've learned. Here's what I've learned from all of you and from our audience. First of all, my episodes weren't long enough. They seemed really long in comparison to a Dateline episode, which is like 5, 6, 7 minutes long each segment. But people wanted more. So the next time we do it, we're going to give you more. The next time we do it, it's going to be a story we haven't already covered on Dateline. And the next time we do it, I would like to put all the episodes out there at once so that people can go through it. Because in this case, we had a lot of people, a lot of names to remember, a lot of things to remember, 2 different murders, 2 crime scenes, 2 investigative agencies. It was a little hard to sort of get up to speed after you've had a week layoff. So the next time around, I'm going to advocate, not that what I want always holds sway around here, but I'm going to advocate that we put them all out at once.
Maybe what I want holds some sway, Josh, because it was maddening to me. I wanted to listen to them all at once, so I'm going to go call the powers that be.
Now they're all available. Motive for Murder.
Now I can.
Wherever you get your podcasts.
From Good Pods. All right, Josh, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for telling that story. It truly was an unbelievable story, and we appreciate it. We can't wait till the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, please download Good Pods. Let us know what you think. We're really excited to hear what you think about the app and help grow this world and people's engagement with podcasts. So thank you again, everyone.
Thanks, JJ.